It's being live streamed.
Yes, that's an announcement that we are now live on Facebook and YouTube so that our audiences there can come and watch too. Yeah, click got it and you should be good.
So how would somebody look up on Facebook? They just go to
they'd go to Veterans Breakfast Club on Facebook and they can view it just as we're viewing it here.
Okay.
Yeah,
All
so
right.
hello
Y'all
to all
hear
of
that
our
in there?
Facebook and YouTube videos or viewers.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Hey, Joanne, if they want to look, they can go on Facebook to Veterans Breakfast Club. Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm going to interview him like I do all my interviews, and that way he will fill us in on. I don't want to ask that many questions. I'm going to let Steve run with the ball. Sometimes, and if the people want to ask you questions, Steve, they can interrupt. It's
Okay.
It's pretty casual. It's sort of like at the, remember Maryville? It's sort of like at Maryville.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I hear you. Well, I brought the book, so there's
Flying low.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah, and we'll be sure to share the link to that book so that people can buy it too. Yeah, tongue twister.
There you go. These earphones are not made for my ears, but there we go. Now I got it in there.
God. Probably all the way to your brain now there, Steve.
Wow. Well, you know, if I'm not careful, I'll punch it through all the way to the other side. Not much to stop it there.
All right. Well, I have 7 o'clock, so I will start the theme music and we can let people in. Good evening, everyone.
Hey, good evening, everyone. I got a little bit of bad news for you. The former KGB agent and Soviet spy, Jack Barsky, is missing in action. I can't get in touch with him. His phone's been disconnected. So either Vladimir Putin or the KGB has caught up with him. I'm not sure yet. In his place tonight, and thank you for doing this, Steve. I have Brigadier General Steve Blanton with us. Steve is a Vietnam veteran. He is my brother from Vietnam. I've known this guy for a long time. We have the same hairline, so this should be a great show. General Blanton, welcome to the show, sir.
Well, thank you, Pete. I appreciate that, and I don't mind being second choice to the KGB, so that's fine.
All right, tell us a little bit about yourself, Steve. Where were you born and raised, and how did you get interested in the military?
Pete, I was born in Atlanta, Georgia. I'm a baby boomer, and my dad was a World War II veteran. He served in the Pacific Theater and in the Navy, and born and raised in Atlanta, Georgia. Had a number of my family members that were in the military, uncles that were in World War II, and my dad, as I said, and my father-in-law as well was a World War II veteran. And as I was a boy growing up, we would have occasion to go through Dahlonega, Georgia, where North Georgia College is. It's the University of North Georgia now. And as we would go through there to a campsite that we would go to often, I would notice those young cadets walking in those military uniforms, and I was so impressed with that as a young boy. And, you know, make a long story short, eventually wound up going to North Georgia College and signing a contract with the Army and getting commissioned out of North Georgia College. And as they say, the rest is history from there.
North Georgia College, that's a great school. I met a lot of people from there that graduated. A lot of the guys served in Vietnam. You guys lost a lot of graduates from North Georgia too.
We did, Pete. We really did. And I don't remember, you know, we've talked several times in the past, and I don't remember if I've ever shared this with you, but when I was a senior at North Georgia College, I used to fashion myself as somewhat of a distance runner. And good friend of mine, Bob Stein, and I decided that we would put together a memorial run in honor of all the North Georgia College graduates who had lost their lives in serving in Vietnam. And so we did a 22.5-mile run from the city limits of Dahlonega, from Gainesville to Dahlonega, 22.5 miles up over the mountains. And we carried a torch. Now, we didn't carry a lit torch the whole 22.5 miles. We carried a fake one. And then when we got to the top of Crown Mountain, they handed me the lit torch. And we carried that onto the campus. The entire Corps of Cadets was there with the band, Mayor of Dahlonega, the president of the college, and we presented that torch and made a little short talk. And that was called the Gainesville Dahlonega Memorial Run. A good friend of mine, Jim Krupe, grabbed that idea and ran with it and publicized that thing. And I still have a scrapbook. It was on the UPI and AP release nationwide. And we actually invited Governor Lester Maddox to come, but he wasn't able to come at that time.
Good old Lester. Steve, I want you to tell the folks about the engine problem, sir.
Well, I was afraid you were going to bring that up. My senior year at North Georgia, I was part of a pilot program. Now, no pun intended with pilot, but the Army started the program called ROTC flight training. And we enrolled in a course to get our private pilot's license. And by doing that, we were committed to go to flight school. Once we got commissioned, we were committed to go to flight school in the Army and become a helicopter pilot. So I had soloed in a Cessna 150, and I only had about 8 or 9 hours flight time. And I was out one afternoon solo, and I was setting up and shooting soft field approaches. Now, you didn't land. You just set up and pick out a cow pasture or whatever, and you would set up for final approach and come in, and then you would abort the landing when you got to be about 500 feet above ground. And so on my last pass, the procedure was that you would flaps up, full mixture rich, and full throttle and pull out. Well, on my last pass, I went flaps up, I full throttle, and I pulled the mixture knob all the way out. Don't know why I did that to this day. Now, what that does, it cuts your fuel off, but it's not instant because there's fuel in the lines. And as I was climbing out, and I got up to about 500 or 600 feet, and the little Cessna started coughing. And I realized immediately what I'd done, and the engine quit. And it gets real quiet up there. Well, I knew I didn't have enough altitude to recrank, and so I just did a hard bank left, did a 360, and I did a soft field landing in that cow pasture. And I took a lot of ribbing from my classmates about that. But you know what? My flight instructor was a man named Horace Steele, and he was an old World War II pilot. He flew over the hump in China. And he told me, put his arm around me, and he says, "Don't worry about that." He said, "Now you know you can do a forced landing if you ever have to." And so
didn't he fly by you or something like that and ask what in the world you were doing on the ground?
The other instructor was out with a student. And after I did that landing, I got out, and it was a real rough landing. That cow pasture was not smooth at all. And bumped my head on top of the, canopy several times. And so got out, I checked the struts and made sure everything was okay. And the aircraft was in remarkably good shape. So I cranked up. I was taxiing, getting in position to do a soft field takeoff. And all of a sudden I hear on the radio, "Blanton, what in the blankety blank are you doing down there?" And I didn't want to admit I'd cut my own engine off. And I came back on the radio and I said, "Well, I had a little engine problem and I landed and I've checked things out and I'm okay now. I'm going to take off." He said, "No, you're not. You shut that aircraft down and you wait on Mr. Steele." And so that's what I did.
So you lied.
Yeah, well, had egg on my face.
All right, very good. Steve, tell us a little bit about your training in your choppers, and then when you got to Vietnam. Let's discuss that a little bit.
Well, I went to flight school in April of '71 out at Fort Wallace, Texas. Now, back then, and that's been closed for many years now, but back then, we did our ground school, of course, but our initial aircraft that we flew was something called the TH-55. I think the civilian version of that is a Hughes 300. Now, the TH-55 is way underpowered. You wouldn't be able to pull a string out of a sick goose with that aircraft. My IP weighed about 50 pounds more than me, and when we hovered, we tilted to his side. But that TH-55, another thing about it is it's all manual. When you pull the collective up, which puts pitch in your rotor blades, you have to roll throttle on at the same time. And I've told people that if you can do a side hill landing in a TH-55, you can fly anything.
Yeah.
And so we went into the TH-55. Then when we got to Fort Rotc, Alabama, we went into the Bell 13. Now, if you've seen MASH, and everybody has, that's the ones they flew in Korea. And they had the 1 liter on each side, and had the old tail boom that was tubular steel, if you recall. And we flew that with our hood training. Under the hood, they'd put this gadget on you, and you couldn't see outside the cockpit, and they had the bottom of the cockpit blacked out, so you had to fly on instruments. My flight class was the first class to graduate with a IFR ticket, instrument flight rules.
Wow.
And if we have time, I'll tell you a story about that. It actually saved my life in Vietnam.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, we'll get to that. I know you transitioned to the Huey. Now, when you did that, you ended up in Vietnam. You can tell us about that, but also, folks, Steve got there at the very end of the Vietnam War. He was there during the pullout. And I want you to get into that about having the communist soldiers around you,
right?
As we had to pull out in disgrace pretty much. But go ahead and grab the ball and run with it, Steve.
Well, after we left the Bell 13, we went into the Hueys, and most of them at that time were H models. We still had some D models, but most of them were H models, the very latest thing. And if I can make an analogy, going from a TH-55 to a Huey was like going from a T model Ford to a Cadillac. I mean, it was really nice. The Huey is the most amazing aircraft that I believe has ever been developed. It was so durable, and you could fill it full of bullet holes, and it's sort of like a Timex watch. It just keep on ticking. And oh yeah, there I am. Oh,
there you are.
So we went into the Huey, and then when we graduated from flight school and got our wings in February of '72, we left there and went to Hunter Army Airfield for Cobra transition. Now, if the Huey was like a Cadillac, then the Cobra was like a Corvette. And man, I couldn't wait to get behind the controls of that Cobra. And so we did the Cobra transition, and that was very quick, about 4 weeks and only about 25 or 30 hours. Then we left there and went to Fort Eustis, Virginia. We call that Fort Useless, Virginia, lovingly, and went back up there for AMOC, Aircraft Maintenance Officer course, which was a 13-week course. And when we graduated from that qualified us as a test pilot and a maintenance officer. And so then it was on to Vietnam from there. And
where did you land in Vietnam?
We landed at right there in Saigon at Tan Son Nhut Air Base and Camp Alpha. We all, processed in at Camp Alpha there. And interesting little side story. I had a good friend who had been over there 3 or 4 months already, he was a signal officer, and he had more clearances than Carter has little pills. He dealt with all that cyber. It was the early days of cyber stuff, but a lot of coded messages and things. And he was at MACV headquarters, Military Assistance Command Vietnam. And he had a room in a hotel in downtown Saigon. And so he said, come on, just bunk in with me. I'll set you up a cot. And so I bunked in with him for 4 or 5 days. Finally got my assignment and happened to run into another North Georgia graduate, which I mentioned this in my book. Wrote a little book called Flying Low. We'll say more about that later on. But ran into Skip Bell, who was a North Georgia graduate.
Yeah, Carl Bell, yeah.
Yeah, he was a couple of 3 years ahead of me. Ran into him as a captain. I was a first lieutenant at that time. And at any rate, he gave me some pointers. And so we got our assignment, and we were assigned to the 18th CAC, Corps Aviation Company. Now, all the aviation assets at that time belonged to the 1st Aviation Brigade. So my combat patch is the 1st Aviation Brigade. We call that chicken on a stick. It's an eagle on a saber. So I was assigned to 18th CAC in the Delta down at Canto, right on the Mekong River. And flew for about 2 months in one of the flight platoons, and got about 350 hours of combat support missions. We flew aerial reconnaissance. I'd have a 06 full colonel US and Arvin in my back seat, and they would have the mount boards, and they would plot B-52 strikes, and we would circle above. And while they did that, and then we flew missions also up into Cambodia, and never knew exactly what we were doing because I was just the driver, so to speak. But we would be given an 8-digit coordinate, and we would come to a hover. We weren't allowed to land in Cambodia. We could only land at the international airport at Phnom Penh. And so we would come to a hover, and folks would run out from the tree line. They would exchange papers and maps, and then we would take off. And by the way, when we went to Cambodia, we had to take a roll of 100-mile-an-hour tape with us to the flight line, and on the tail boom where it says United States Army, we had to tape over the word Army, because you see, the Army wasn't flying in Cambodia.
Of course, they didn't fly in Laos either.
No.
Yeah. Okay.
So that was some of the things that we did while we were over there. And then as time went along, old man called me in one day, and he said my maintenance platoon leader is derosing, going home, and it's a captain slot, and I was the 1st lieutenant. He said, you're going to be my new maintenance officer. And so I took charge of a 40-man maintenance platoon, and had 3 test pilots besides myself. And the interesting thing about that, Pete, was when somebody was out on a mission, and if they got a warning light or a check engine light or a metal chip light or something like that, they had to land and call us, and we'd take them another aircraft, and then we had to fly the one back with the bad stuff, because we were the test pilots. So, but it was quite an interesting time. And as time went along, Pete, now I'm just babbling on here. You jump in if you have a question. One of the things that we had to do was we had to be involved with the drawdown. Okay. And I get irritated when I hear people compare our drawdown to what happened in Afghanistan recently. It was not at all the same thing, not at all. Okay. We had about 23,000 soldiers in country when we started the drawdown. And before I left, I signed over 34 H model Huey helicopters to the VNAF, the Vietnamese Air Force of South Vietnam. And when I left, I reached up and I turned the lights out in my hangar, literally, and got on a C-130, rode it to Saigon. And we spent a couple of days in Saigon out processing. And you mentioned this earlier, Pete. Now we had we had been enemies for 10 plus years with the VC, the Viet Cong, and the NVA, the North Vietnamese Army. And I don't know whether you have any of those photographs, but I have photographs that can prove that I was standing right next to them at the airport there at the airstrip at Thompson.
I think Ellie has that. You have that photograph of all the different officers?
There you
go.
Well, now that was actually back at Can To.
Okay.
That was prior to our leaving. Let me point out here, this was at Can To prior to our leaving. And if you'll go from left to right, the one in the green fatigues, that is a Army of Vietnam, South Vietnam. That is a full colonel. Next to him is a full colonel, NVA, North Vietnam.
One over, Ellie. There you go.
Yeah. And then, of course, the big fella, that's a U.S. Colonel. And then to his left is a Viet Cong colonel. And that was at Can To. They had some kind of little ceremony there before we left. But then when we got to Saigon, they had VC and NVA observing our withdrawal. And it was just a little bit irritating. I won't say humiliating, because we knew we had whipped their butts at every turn. Yeah. But it was a little bit irritating to have to put up with that.
Did they ever say anything to you, or former enemies? Did they ever talk to you or say anything to you?
Well, there was a language barrier, of course, but not really, Pete. It was all very professional. And we were told and briefed ahead of time, said, just be soldiers, be soldiers. And that's what we did. And, we would nod to them and they would nod back, but we didn't really try to converse with them in any manner whatsoever. And they really sort of kept their distance, Pete. They weren't very comfortable with that situation either.
You mentioned that one of the older choppers you trained in, that training saved your life. What were you talking about?
Okay. Yes. My flight class, 7144, was the first flight class to graduate with an instrument flight rules ticket, meaning that we were qualified to fly helicopters 100% on instruments with no ground reference at all. Now, that's a tough thing to do, especially in a Huey. Now, these helicopters nowadays are very sophisticated, more so than a Huey. But we had that capability. And so we were on a mission and we were on the way back in. Now, you have to understand, during the wet season, storms come up every hour or so. And I mean, you can be just blue skies, and then in 30 minutes, you'll be socked in. Well, we saw two thunderheads off in the distance, and they were about to collide. And we pulled that collective up under our arm and leaned the nose over, and about 120 knots is all a Huey will do. And we had it topped out, and we were trying to get between those two thunderheads before they closed up, and we didn't make it. Well, the warrant officer I was flying with was non-instrument qualified, so I took over the controls, and I had no ground reference at all. Now, this would have made a good movie. I mean, it was classic. We had lightning bolts crackling all around us. It was dark, pitch dark. And so I was on instruments 100%, and the fluid in your ears will do some tricks to you. You'll think you're in a dive when you're actually in a climb, and vice versa. You'll think you're banking left when you're actually straight and level. We were in that suit for probably 10 minutes, but it felt like 10 hours. And when we came out on the other side, I was not a Christian then, but when we came out on the other side, I bowed my head and thanked the Lord the best I knew how at that time. And because it was a hairy situation. Yeah.
Did you lose anybody in Vietnam?
Pete, we did. One of the most tragic things, the very first day, I lost one of my earpieces here just a second. The very first day that the peace treaty went into effect, the so-called peace treaty, we had a young WO1, Wobbly 1. That's a warrant officer 1, Anthony Del Pazzo, and he was flying what we called an ash and trash mission. He just he picked up one of the province advisors and a U.S. colonel and was flying them from place to place, and they were flying low level. He probably shouldn't have been doing that, but he knew that hostilities had ceased supposedly, and so he was flying low level along a canal south of Canto, and just a lucky shot. VC, we assume it was a VC, took a couple of shots at him with an AK-47, and Anthony Del Pazzo took a round through his helmet, and he didn't kill him instantly. It went in here and somehow went around like this, and but he died upon arrival back at Canto, and he's one of the last names on that wall in up there in Washington. We did have another very tragic situation. We had a CH-47 with about 23 passengers on board, and they were all lost to a SA-7, a heat-seeking missile. And the thing about the SA-7, you didn't have to be a good marksman to hit a target because it was a heat seeker. All you had to do was aim it in the general direction, and it would, find its way to the heat. And interesting thing. Now, I've fortunately never had to pull this maneuver, but the evasive maneuver for an SA-7 was if you saw a white contrail coming towards you, that was an SA-7. Yeah. And the evasive maneuver was you were supposed to turn and fly directly toward it. And the thinking was that it would whistle past you because you're putting the heat behind you. And but fortunately, I never had to pull that maneuver. So. Do you know of anybody that did? Not personally, but I heard stories of people that did. And by the way, back to that CH-47 that did go down with the SA-7. The next day after that happened, I had a mission in that area, and we flew over that site, and there was nothing there. I mean, it was just a big black spot. There was nothing. So I don't know that they even were able to, recover any bodies. They may have recovered pieces. That's one of those killed in action, body not recovered. More than likely, yes. Yeah. I'll tell you what, before we leave Vietnam with you, does anybody have any questions for General Blanton? Okay. All right. Well, after Vietnam, those are easy to answer. Yeah. Steve, after Vietnam, what did you do? After I came back from Vietnam, Pete, I was assigned back to Fort Eustis, Virginia. Now, I was a transportation officer. They didn't have an aviation branch back in that day. Each aviator had his own basic branch that he belonged to. And so I was assigned back to Fort Eustis, Virginia. That's the home of the Transportation Corps. And I was assigned as an executive officer in the 155th Terminal Service Company. Now, that's a bunch of stevedores, folks that load and unload ships. And we had one of the biggest ships anywhere, but it wouldn't float. It was built on land. It was called the land ship, and it was for training purposes. And I did that for a while, and then they moved me to battalion headquarters, the 10th Transportation Battalion, and we were the training officer for the 10th Transportation Battalion. And this was back around the time that we were having an oil crisis back in '73, you may recall. And there was an oil shortage, and we had lines at all the gas stations and everything. And so one of the things that I came up with to sort of put a spotlight on that was we had a race on post, a Jeep race, quarter tons. And we had a race, but it was a different kind of race. Each company entered 1 quarter ton Jeep in the race, and the race consisted of a mapped out course, and you were given 1 gallon of gasoline. You had to drain the tank, and you were given 1 gallon of gasoline, and the vehicle that could go the farthest on that 1 gallon of gasoline won the race. And so that was sort of a publicity stunt, but it sort of focused the community on the fact that, hey, we got a gas shortage here, and you need to, keep your vehicles tuned up and oiled and so on and so forth. So
it sounds like 285 in Atlanta.
Yeah.
All right. Let's quickly go over your career, Steve, and you got your first start, Brigadier General. Tell us a little bit about your career, and then we'll open up questions.
I had a very interesting career. I ended my time of active duty in August of '74. I was still a first lieutenant because I was on a promotion list at that time to make captain in October of '74, but I wanted to be a coach and a teacher. And so I applied for an early out, got out and started a teaching and coaching career, moved to Rutledge, Georgia. Fast forward about 9 years later, a good friend of mine, W.H. Ashburn, who was an educator in Morgan County and also a career National Guardsman. He was a battalion commander in the Georgia Guard. He talked me into going into the Guard. So I went into the Army National Guard in March of '83 as a 34-year-old first lieutenant. I was an odd animal. You see, most lieutenants are just fuzzy-faced kids, but I was a 34-year-old first lieutenant. So as I progressed along in my career, which I picked up my military career after almost a 9-year break, I eventually went in to the full-time technician program. In 2000, I took a job as the mate's superintendent down at Fort Stewart, Georgia. Now, by that time, I was a lieutenant colonel, and I had commanded a maintenance company as a captain. Then I went back and commanded that same company as a major because they had an MTO change. In other words, they had a change in their organization, and they required a major commander. So I went back, commanded that as a major. So then I went to Fort Stewart as the mate superintendent. Spent 3 years down there, and then they moved me to Atlanta. Became the equipment specialist supervisor for the Georgia Army National Guard, and then my last full-time position was as the state maintenance officer, and I was in charge of combat readiness for all ground support equipment and vehicles for the Georgia Army National Guard. Had 14 maintenance shops statewide, 350 technicians. Now that's on the full-time side of the house. On the M day, or on the soldier side, I commanded the 201st S&S Battalion, and we had an interesting mission in September of '05. You remember what happened to the Gulf Coast in September of '05? Katrina came calling.
Yeah.
And I carried an 800 soldier task force down there, and we spent about 2.5 weeks doing, disaster relief and helping those folks out there. And I tell you what, I'm to this day, I'm amazed by the attitude of those Mississippians. Pete, we were down there to help them, and the first question most of them would ask us was, "What can we do to help you?"
Wow.
They were just amazing. Some great Americans down there.
When did you get your first start? When did you become a brigadier general?
Pete, I got one of those out the door promotions. I was a full colonel, and upon retirement, I was promoted to brigadier general on the state retired list. So I am a brigadier general retired, and I emphasize the retired part.
Steve, wasn't it you that we were at the Army Aviation Heritage Foundation?
Yes.
And you ran into someone that you served with in Vietnam and hadn't seen each other since, but that day. Tell us about that day. We
did. In fact, my company commander from Vietnam, Jerry Childers, he was a major back in that day. All your aviation companies were commanded by majors. And Jerry was my commander. He was on his third tour at that time. Wow. And he happened to be at the Army Aviation Foundation over there in Hampton. Yep. And we had sort of a reunion. And besides Jerry, young man from California, John Harris, who was a wobbly one back in Vietnam, and who actually, when he retired, he was the longest tenured aviator still on flight status in the Army, active or reserve or guard. He was on flight status continuously for about 40 years.
Really?
And he retired, and he's been active in the Army Aviation Heritage Foundation. He's a Cobra pilot. And in fact, that day that we were all there, he flew Jerry. He took Jerry up in a Cobra. Jerry rode in the front seat. Now this is interesting because Jerry Childers flew he flew the second Cobra that ever came off the assembly line at the Bell helicopter plant in Texas. He flew the second Cobra ever made. And then Jerry took the first Cobras to Vietnam and stood up one of the first CAV units. And I should know that unit designation, but I don't have it right with me. But he stood up one of the first CAV units that ever served in Vietnam.
I remember talking to those guys, and one of them flew one of the first Cobras. And when it came out, it had wheels. It didn't have skids, it had wheels.
Right.
And they finally realized, well, wait a minute, if a wheel gets shot off, when you land, that blade's going to hit the ground. So they went to skids. That's strange.
That would have been Jerry who you talked with about that. Yeah. Jerry Childers.
Great guy. That was a good day.
Now Jerry retired. His last job, Pete, show you how this Army works, and it's like one big family. When Jerry retired, his last job, he was chief of staff for the 101st Airborne Division at Fort Campbell, Kentucky. Okay. His commander, the 2-star, was a man by the name of Dwayne Patrick. Dwayne Patrick is also a North Georgia graduate.
Huh.
I'm in the Gideon ministry, and I speak in churches around the state. Several years ago, I spoke in a church in Thompson, Georgia. They found out I was retired general and all that stuff, and they said, well, you need to go to the Sunday school class of General so-and-so. Well, it turned out to be Dwayne Patrick. Well, I had never met him, but by chance, I asked him if he knew Jerry Childers, because I knew that Jerry had been chief of staff of the 101st Airborne. And as it turned out, Jerry had been his chief of staff.
Small world in the military sometimes.
Amazing.
All right. Any of you Vietnam veterans listening in, you got some questions for Steve? You want to talk to him? Where's Jack Cole? Hey, Jack, there's Lieutenant Colonel Jack Cole. How you doing, Jack?
Doing fine, boss.
Hey, Jack.
How you doing, Steve?
Hey, I'm doing great, man. Welcome home, brother.
Thank you. Same to you. In fact,
absolutely.
I've met you a couple of times, and we had a lot in common. I was a transportation officer, Fort Eustis, or right. Useless, and went to T school. Got my commission. I had my commission. Went to T school for basic officer, and then I went to Av Labs. I know you know where Av Labs is, because that's on the way down to this kind of your land-based ship.
Yeah.
And we've been down there a lot of times too. And then I went to Aviation Maintenance Officers course, AMOC, in '67, and went to Vietnam. I was an aviation maintenance officer for 388 Trans Company.
Wow.
Down in the Delta. We supported the Delta. And also our sister company was 301st, and they had a C-47s. And we go down and pick up a chopper, and we call them in there, and mostly we was head slings, but if we needed to, we could put the 4-point sling on it, shall we say. Another one of our missions was very interesting. All the Jeep carriers coming into South Vietnam were stationed right off the coast. And our mission was to go over there and TI them the ones on the deck, take the rubber cocoon off of them, just protect them from salt water.
Right.
Put the rotors on them, TI them, and bring our test pilots in and fly them off.
Hey, Jack, tell the folks what a Jeep carrier is. Some people may not know what a Jeep carrier is.
Those Jeep carriers were basically World War II carriers that were a lot smaller than the big class carriers.
Yeah.
And they're basically used for transportation of aircraft from one location to another, and also a backup in World War II to take the aircraft and fly them over and replace the ones that their big aircraft carriers lost.
Yeah.
Cool.
But that was a good job.
That's awesome. Awesome.
Then we went back to Fort Eustis, the Aviation Material Laboratories, for a year. And then I stayed in the Transportation Corps, retired as a lieutenant colonel, active in reserves all the way through. And the last duty assignment was assistant director of logistics at the 81st ARCOM. And I know you probably work with those guys too. So.
Hey, Jack, if I recall our interview right, I might be wrong, but you told me where you were stationed, there was a rest in.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, a rest area near the beach, and you guys would go down to the beach, but across the water, the Viet Cong, the Vietnamese communists, had their own area.
Yeah, there's Vung Tau had this peninsula, and they had two mountains right at the end of the peninsula, and the China
Viet Cong
had artillery mounted on top to overlook the whole area. And between those two mountains, they call it on Fronts Beach, was actually an area for the VC that had their R&R. And we could not drive over the boulevard there at Front Beach because that area was all them. And we always knew when they were coming. They rocketed us and mortared us and stuff like that from an island off the coast. And pretty soon you see the guys walking down there and with their black boots and black civilian clothing on, and oh, hey, they're back again. And it was always funny. You didn't bother them, and they didn't bother you. You know.
Hey, Jack, you mentioned Vung Tau.
Yeah.
Of course, that's the in-country R&R center.
Right.
A lot of folks probably didn't know that. Good friend of mine, who you may have run into in the reserves, he was a signal officer, and the same fellow that I mentioned earlier that I bunked in with when I first got in country, name was David Bailey. Now, he was not an aviator, and he came down to visit me one weekend in Canto, and I had Sunday off, didn't have a mission schedule, so I talked to the flight ops officer, and I got him to schedule a single ship mission to Vung Tau.
Yeah.
And
Schedule,
I put David in the right seat, who was not a pilot. I put him in the right seat, and I flew us to Vung Tau. I landed on the beach, tied the rotor blades down. We spent the day at the beach. We flew back that evening without incident. And I think maybe I'm past the statute of limitations by now for misuse of government funds, but that's what we did. And no, we had a great time, a great day.
Isn't that a great beach along there?
Yeah, it was awesome. Awesome.
You get on top of that one of the mountains at the end. I call it mountain. It was probably 300 foot tall, maybe. Mm-hmm. And look north along that beach. It is gorgeous. And of course, that was also Vung Tau was also the kind of the R&R center, should we say, for the government people. They had some beautiful houses downtown. They really did.
Absolutely.
You guys remember Judge Sidney Nation, right? Sidney Nation, Judge Sidney Nation.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
So, he was a Supreme Court, or not Supreme Court, but anyway, high-ranking judge. He was also in Nam, and I was the first one that he talked to about it, and it was a great interview. But he was also in charge of a supply depot, Dodge rockets and all that kind of stuff. But the first cab, you're talking about the choppers going, and maybe they shouldn't be, but choppers would come down for the first cab. Nobody'd say anything. They would come down and they would hook up to a pallet load of whiskey. fly off with it, and nobody ever reported it. Nobody said a thing. We had a lot of confiscation going on in Vietnam.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
It was great.
There certainly was. And well, I'll tell you something else. When we're doing the drawdown, and I mentioned earlier that I had to sign over 34 H model Hueys to the VNAF. Well, at that time, we still had, a number of civilian companies, American companies in country. People like Lear Siegler and Air America and people like that. And I had a good relationship with those people because we swapped work and helped each other out. Well, I called those guys up and they backed up trucks to my hangar, and we loaded tool kits, we loaded brake lathes, we loaded drill presses, everything we could give them. Now, we couldn't give them the aircraft, but we loaded everything we could give them. We just gave it to them. I wrote it off as a combat loss. And so when the VNAF came to sign for the last of the 34 Hueys, I still had probably 20 or so that we needed to turn over to him. And so he had a little inspection team with him, and they walked around the first helicopter for 25, 30 minutes. And then he came over and handed me a gig list as long as my arm, and handed it to me. He said, "You fix." I looked at that list and I handed it back to him. Now, I had 7 people left out of a 40-man platoon. They had all de-roasted and gone home. And we didn't have any tools anyhow. I handed that list back to him. I said, you sign. He signed for all 34. They didn't look at another, for 20, about 20 of them left. He signed for all of them, didn't look at another one,
But as we talk, it had nothing comparable to the pullout in Afghanistan.
Oh, not at all. I mean,
Yeah.
Pete, now people have this picture in their mind of that helicopter on the embassy in 2 years later after we had gone in 75. And they have that picture in their mind. But all we had in country, military wise at that time, was a handful of Marines at the there at the embassy,
Yes.
for security for the embassy. And that's all we had in country. Now, when we pulled out under the terms of the peace agreement, we got all the civilians out that were working in various places all around the country. All the provinces where people were assigned, they all came out first. And then the military came out last. We came out last. And, it was done, I don't want to get on my soapbox, but it was done totally backwards back in August there in Afghanistan. It was not coordinated properly. And by the way, Pete, and I'm not at liberty to say, and I really don't know the details, but a couple of my classmates who are North Georgia graduates, of course, and we had our 50-year reunion last weekend, a year and a half late. It'd been scheduled 3 times and finally came off. But a couple of my classmates are involved with some of these private groups, still trying to get people out from over there. So that effort is still ongoing. No thanks to our present administration.
Yeah, I understand.
But that effort is still ongoing.
I still maintain that a Boy Scout could have planned a better pullout.
Oh,
and that we deserted Bagram Air Base. It blew my mind when they did that. I think somebody else was trying to ask a question. Is that right?
Yeah, go ahead. Who was that?
Yeah, it looks like Connor Ritchie here has a question. Connor.
Hey, Connor.
Good to see you, Pete. How are you?
I'm still kicking. Connor, how you doing, guy?
Doing very well. Looks like me and you have in common. We both interview veterans. We both have members that served in the Second World War. So I've been mostly working on World War II veterans, and I'm working on 2 currently right now. So it'll be exciting.
Very good. Very good.
Awesome.
You need to get in touch with me, Connor. I got some World War II veterans for you.
That would be great.
Okay, very good.
Pete?
Thank you for being the historian you are, Connor. Thank you for keeping that alive.
Pete.
I think a lot of us right here now may see the last World War II veteran pass away. That's going to be, and with them goes the truth.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Jack, you had something to say?
Yeah, Steve, did you know Tony Fritz, who was worked for the National Guard as the head mechanic, went all over to different places all over Georgia?
Tony Friss.
Uh-huh.
I don't know. It does not sound familiar.
Yeah, he was the head mechanic for the National Guard in Georgia, and he would go and do major stuff all over the different sites. And
Yeah, what years was that? I may have missed him. It may have been before my time in the Guard.
Yeah, probably so. It may have been. I think it was in the 80s, early 80s, 70s, 80s.
Well, I went in March of '83 after that long break in the service, and I was continuously in from March of '83 until August of '08.
Okay.
So.
Hey, Ben Wright, weren't you a C-130 pilot? Ben?
Yes, sir. I flew 130s. I was last in Tonsanute on April 28th, 1975, which was the last day of fixed wing. The similarity of that with Afghanistan was we were putting over 200 people in the back of a 130 and flying them to either Cuby Point or Clark.
Wow.
Ben, you might be able to relate to this. When I left out of Tonsanute, I tell people the first jumbo jet I ever saw, I flew on it. They took us out of there on a 747 jumbo jet, and this was in end of March of '73, and it was Braniff Airlines. And I'll never forget, the pilot pulled out on the runway, and then he stopped and he backed up as far as he could back up and hung that tail over the end of the runway so that he would have every inch of runway that was available. And when he shot the coals to that thing and we started rolling, and we had every seat full and everybody had 2 duffel bags. I mean, we were loaded to the gills. And I'll never forget, we were rolling down that runway and we was looking at each other and rolling down that runway, and man, we were rolling and rolling and we're thinking, okay, come on, let's get this thing off the ground, And I mean, he just grunted that thing off the ground right off the end of the runway. And when he did, every hat in that place went up in the air, and the loudest cheer you've ever heard.
Tell you what happened to my Freedom Bird. We took off from Tonsanute, got airborne. Everybody went crazy. I've been there 2.5 years. I went crazy. Okay. We were so happy. And then things sort of calmed down. And as soon as they calmed down, the pilot came over the intercom system and said, "Fellas, I hate to tell you this, but we have been intercepted by Chinese jets. Whoa. And we have to fly into China. We have been basically captured." And he was joking. And had we been able to break down that door, we probably would have killed him.
Oh my goodness.
But yeah. And this time, when I flew back to the States for the last time, instead of going through Hawaii, we landed in Anchorage, Alaska, in jungle fatigues and about 3 feet of snow. Okay. And when we got off the jet, Steve, that's the first time I saw a 747. It was parked next to us. And I wondered how they got it off the ground.
Yeah.
That thing was huge. Any more questions, guys? Anybody have anything to say to General Blanton or any comments? All right. Steve, let me ask you this.
Yeah.
Give me some final thoughts on Vietnam.
Okay.
Go ahead. Give me some final thoughts of Vietnam, what we did there, and our final thought.
Pete, it was a long time coming. All Vietnam veterans know this. When we came home, there weren't any parades. There weren't, no confetti falling from the sky. No pats on the back. Now our own families welcomed us home and thanked us for what we had done. Yeah. But finally, And I began to see this beginning to change back during Desert Shield, Desert Storm. I was so proud of the way our military was welcomed home then. And even now, up until today, even though the military's gotten some bad press over this last, debacle, but I've seen a change. And so finally, after all those years, I wear a Vietnam veterans cap. Most places I go, I have several different ones. And it's really warms my heart. Even young people, teenagers, kids will come up and thank me for my service.
Yeah.
And that's one of the big things I've seen change. As far as the Vietnam War itself, Pete, you can sit here and say what if all day long.
Yeah.
But I'll just tell you this. This many years after World War II, we still have a presence in Japan and Germany, and both those countries are free countries, more or less. Okay, they have a different form of government than we do, but they're not under communism. This many years after Korea, we still have a presence in Korea, and South Korea is still a free country. Had we left a small force in Vietnam, I believe things would be a lot different today. I believe there would still be a free South Vietnam.
Wow.
And even though it's one country under communism, free enterprise is ruling the day in Vietnam. Now, the government's probably taking all the benefits of that, but it's a tragic thing to look back on and think that, we spent all that money and lost all those lives. And you think, why?
I understand. And also the tag you see on a lot of the products that say made in China, that's capitalism. It's not communism.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
That's how they've made their money.
Pete, I'm not here to sell books, but if anybody wants to Google Flying Low, just Google Flying Low by Stephen E. Blanton. It's on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Books A Million, all those different websites, and they can take a look at it. Yeah.
All right.
Pete, I have one other thing.
Hey, folks, this is Bill's girlfriend, Kim. Say hi, Kim.
Hi.
She wants to say hi to everybody.
Thank you
remember
for your
Jack Doyle?
service.
Jack from the Round Table.
Hey, Jack.
How you doing,
Steve
Kim?
Blanton, I think you've met him before, General Blanton.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Hello.
Good to see you.
Okay, she wanted to get her pretty face over here and say hi to everybody.
God bless
Good
you
to
all.
see you. Good to see you.
Okay. For you guys that don't know, I am not in St. Augustine, Florida, where I usually live. I came up here to make a presentation in North Georgia at Big Canoe. And on the way down to my buddy's house where I was staying, I lost a radiator in my car. So I got the radiator fixed by Bill. He works for a dealership. And so I'll be going back tomorrow tonight. But so I'm broadcasting from Atlanta, Georgia, hot Atlanta. And it's usually hot because of all the gunfire. But I love North Georgia, Steve, and around Dahlonega and North Georgia College. It's so pretty up there. It really is.
Yeah, it's great. I was there last weekend, like I mentioned earlier. Yeah.
Yeah. Anybody have anything else they want to say about Afghanistan, Vietnam?
If I can just interject really quickly, I put this in the chat, but this past week, our episode of the Scuttlebutt, which is the Veterans Breakfast Club podcast, we talked to Adam Zafudo, who's an Afghanistan war veteran, and he got really candid, just some of the things that we've been talking about what the end of the war was like for him and what veterans like him are thinking and feeling right now. So if you're interested in hearing more of those stories, head over to our website. I put the link in the chat to hear more about that too.
You have something special coming up for Veterans Day too.
We do, yes. We'll be having a special Veterans Day event on Zoom, the Veterans Breakfast Club, and we'll be having more details about that coming out shortly. But yes, the Veterans Breakfast Club will be online on Zoom on Veterans Day. So exciting announcements about that.
something like about a 24-hour ordeal with different veterans and things like that.
Yes, we're thinking we'll be on Zoom for 24 hours, believe it or not. So stay tuned for more about that coming up.
You guys do a good job, Ellie. Thank you so much for what y'all do. And how many Vietnam veterans do we have out there today or tonight? There's one. Robert, what'd you do in Nam, sir? Robert, can you hear me?
I don't think Robert's microphone's working.
Oh, there you go. I think you're unmuted.
I got a dog here.
We can hear you now.
Okay. I was a generator mechanic with the 199th Light Infantry Brigade at a fire base south of Saigon.
All right, very good. Thank you for your service. Okay.
Absolutely.
Robert, didn't you raise your hand?
Who, me? Who,
Yeah,
me?
yeah.
I've been screwing around trying to get my webcam back on. And I inadvertently, before I didn't realize there's a switch on the side of the computer that cut it off. So I have to go to my HP assistant to get that squared away.
Okay.
Like I served in both Vietnam and Iraq, and I'm still of the opinion, the Congress handed Vietnam, South Vietnam to North Vietnam.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, I know.
It just it boggles my mind what they did. It's like naturally you cut off the money to to buy the bullets and the fuel and the spare parts, and we saw the end result. And then Afghanistan to me is the total reverse. We gave them everything, and what did they do? Somewhere someone screwed up royally. Was it the military intelligence, the civilian intelligence, or both? I mean, Afghanistan's just been one screw up. And I was reading a criticism by a Muslim author, and he said that the big problem is we tried to impose our democratic, how should I say, overview on Afghanistan instead of working locally. And one of the key things in Afghanistan, in our culture, warlords. We should have been aligned with the warlords, not those yahoos back in the capital. And a prime example of that, who's the first person the Taliban killed? It was that one warlord up in the North Central. They went in with the alleged cameraman and sound guy.
That's right, yeah. That was the Northern Alliance.
Yeah, and it's just like, I just shake my head at the mistakes our government and military has made over the years. I'm going, all that money, all that time, and especially all those lives gone. Yeah. What do we have to show for it?
Hey, Robert and Pete, our son, he's 44 years old. He's a battalion commander in the 101st. He's got the 5th Battalion, 101st Aviation Eagle Assault. And he is a 3-time Iraqi war veteran, 2 times in Afghanistan. Wow. And I sent him an encouraging message, thanking him for his service and the way they've kept us safe for 20 years when all that junk was going on over there. And I want to just read you real quick what he wrote, because our military is in good hands down where the rubber meets the road. It's the yahoos at the Pentagon that are messing up. And, so here's what a lieutenant colonel says. No change to our mission. We will always be ready and be willing to fight. Our future is war, and we are ready. We're not concerned with an inferior force in Afghanistan or Iraq. We are ready to fight a peer force in China or Russia. We are trained, fit, and disciplined, a team that is ready to fight our future wars and win. Our military is in good shape where it counts. We just need to get better leadership.
I think we are. God bless these guys.
Pete, I have a comment.
Sure, Jack.
About Vietnam. I don't know how many of you've read the book Dereliction of Duty.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
I got it to read.
You do?
Oh yeah, it was like I've got about 6 or 7 books to read, and I just pulled it out. It's the next one on my list once I finish what I'm reading now.
Prepare to get angry.
Yeah, really. Not only angry, really pissed off. I mean,
I would recommend that for anyone to read, because it's not just Vietnam, Jack, that dealt with the dereliction duty, dealt with Vietnam, but we need some books coming out about Afghanistan too.
Yeah.
And I think when they come out, we're going to get the full story about what happened. And, you mentioned the warlords in Iraq, when we were fighting for Fallujah, which was a heck of a battle. We eventually won that because the warlords joined us. They were sick and tired of Al-Qaeda and all the violence that they were causing. And when the warlords joined us, we kicked the butt. Okay. But I do agree. We've been nation building at the wrong place. We first need to build this nation back up, in my humble opinion. Oh, geez, let's not get on too many politics, folks. Ellie,
I see it.
Hey, Pete.
Yeah.
Hey, Pete, when I was in
Yeah.
Iraq, I remember this one Iraqi, he used to come up to our talk to sell us like power tools. And he was a tall dude, about 6'3". And I asked him, I said, what'd you do before we got here? He says, I was a MiG pilot. And I said, oh, you're Ba'ath Party Sunni. And he said, yeah. And I asked him, what's the difference between you Sunni and a Shia? And he says, well, when Mohammed died, we followed one son and they followed the other one. We've been at each other's throats since then. And when you Americans leave, we're going back at it. And my instantaneous thought was, what the hell are we doing here? And I have been of the opinion since late 2004, get the hell out of the Middle East. They're friggin' crazy.
We just need to keep them from coming over here. That's the key.
Yeah,
It is.
that's it.
I see Connor's hand raised here.
Hey,
Connor.
Connor, come on, Connor.
Turn your video back on, Connor.
Pretty dark out where you are.
Yeah, it's very dark. It's like 7 o'clock outside. Yep.
Did you have a question?
You had your hand up, Connor. You got a question?
I have so many thoughts, actually. Well,
Okay.
first, that starts me why I interview those veterans, because of my great-grandfather's Air Force career in World War II, and my great-great-uncles were Navy and Army. And I just always had a determined interest of World War II veterans and hearing their stories. And I'm on 24 now, soon to be 26. I'm actually working on 2 veterans that I'll be working on. One is one of the last surviving members of the Tuskegee Airmen, which is a segregated unit of all Black fighter groups. And one, we call him Pee-wee, but his real name is Jim Martin, who was a paratrooper at 101st Airborne. But I feel like we should remember every war. One of my grandmother's cousins was in Vietnam, and I think it was shameful how they were treated after the war. And I have several classmates of mine literally do not stand up and disrespect the flag, and think every time a soldier fight the enemies, which is racist. I don't think it's racist. I think it's called protecting their country and doing the right thing. And I confronted one classmate of mine about that, and I was told by the coach, just ignore it. He's always gonna be like that. So I ignored it. I told him that it was not a right thing to call one of my relatives racist, because all he did was fight his country. So I think that was really disrespectful of him to do. I think it was kind of stupid in his part. So I'm just doing everything I can to learn what reality is and learn about the history before it's too late. Because I'm literally one of the few young people in this world that actually have a determined interest, while the other ones would rather sit under chairs and play video games all the time. It's just sad.
Connor, that's great statements. Thank you so much for that. That's wonderful.
What time are you going to leave tomorrow, Pete?
I'm probably going to leave tonight.
Oh well, I can't get you that plaque.
No, we'll discuss that later.
Got it.
Wow.
Let me mention one thing for Pete too. He's the commander of the World War II Roundtable. We'd like to invite anybody to come to it. hopefully we're going to get it started again. And he's my boss as a sergeant, and I was a lieutenant colonel, but that's okay. But it's a good organization.
Well, according to our former governor here in Georgia, I'm a lieutenant colonel now, Jack.
Oh, yeah, right. Former governor. Now you're not a lieutenant colonel anymore.
That's true. That's true.
Would you be interested in doing some speeches for some of the military associations I'm in?
Sure. Absolutely.
Well,
We're back on the road now. This pandemic's got to be over, whether the bug's still out there or not, because our country's falling apart with this pandemic. We got to get out there and live, and we got to build this country back up. That's just my personal opinion, but that's the way it is.
I agree. I agree.
Yes, Robert. Robert, go ahead.
Hey, I just read in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette today, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania now has a full vaccination rate of 70.1%. That means both the first and second. And I know I'm one of the few too that's also gotten the Pfizer booster. I got it last week, my flu shot up at the VA. And I wonder how many other states in the United States are up to that. I've noticed on the national news over the last 2.5, 3 weeks that the number of new cases is dropping.
Yes.
Which is encouraging. And I think it's, with a combination of the vaccinations and people who've already gotten COVID-19 and have built up some antibodies,
Right.
And hopefully we've hit that plateau and we're going to go the other way, but I'd love to see the rest of the United States have that 70% plus vaccination rate, because that seems to be the real nip it in the bud procedure. And just looking at the number of people that are in with ventilators, like what was it, the state earlier, was it Montana or Idaho? 100% of the people in our ICUs were all prior unvaccinated. And, I think people are starting to say, maybe I better get that vaccination. It's like down south, but we had 5 or 6 states that had the highest unvaccinated. And oh my God, for about 2 or 3 weeks there, it was horrendous what was going on in their hospitals. And I know, like here in Pittsburgh, they were interviewing Allegheny General Hospital and the UPMC Hospital about them taking COVID patients from down south, and they already were gearing up to do it. But they weren't going to jeopardize the rest of us here in Western Pennsylvania. They were willing to take up to a certain percentage and then cut it, to relieve it, the pressure on them down there. And I just hope that, when I saw that 70.1%, I said, that is encouraging.
There's a lot of controversy about that. I've had my shots, and I think a lot of us have and everything, but it does come down, well, it's my body, and I'm not getting into pro-life or pro-choice here, but the women say, hey, it's my body, it's my choice type thing. That should apply to everybody. Okay.
Yeah, but do you remember the Supreme Court ruling during the Spanish flu? They challenged the vaccinations, and the Supreme Court said, hey, if the U.S. government determines that you got to get vaccinated, they have the right to do that to protect the public health. But, neither Trump nor Biden has really enforced that. It's like just looking at Biden, he says, okay, I'm requiring government people and transportation to get vaccinated, Well,
if you look at the news today, and if you see some of these children, 5, 6, 7 years old in school, they got the little mask on and everything else. Kim has kids. They're probably wearing masks in school. And this past weekend, I saw several football games with 100,000 people at the stadium, and I didn't see one darn mask. So
I was watching Penn State. I saw a few.
I
mean a few.
Alabama lost to the Georgia Bulldogs. No, not the Georgia Bulldogs.
Yeah, I saw that at the end of that too. Yeah.
I don't want to interrupt here, but I do want to ask if Pete, we had a few questions in the chat about the guests we had originally scheduled who did not show. I think as people are coming on, they were wondering where he was. Would you mind just reiterating and then also letting us know just his story briefly?
Sure. All right. I had Jack Barsky scheduled. He's a former KGB agent, a Soviet spy during the Cold War. He was trained by the KGB. He thought that the communism was the greatest thing going. He came to America to spy on us. He came up through Mexico. How about that? Okay. Landed in Chicago. Thought he would become very Americanized. So he went out and bought some sport coats and coat and tie, nice shoes, and was walking down the street and finally realized he was the only white man in that area walking down the street and was wondering what in the world's going on. He was in the wrong part of Chicago for spying, okay? He eventually got to the Northeast. He did spy, but his main task was converting students, college students, okay, to hopefully go the communist way. He said he didn't like it. He sent false reports back. He was eventually confronted with the KGB and they told him to come home. And he said, I just got out of the KGB. And I said, wait a minute. You don't just get out of the KGB. He said, well, they let me get out because he lied, but he sent them a note back saying, well, I have contacted AIDS. What do you want me to do? He never heard from the KGB again. Okay. He was eventually uncovered by the FBI. He eventually turned. He eventually fell in love. He never knew what love meant. He came from a very cold type atmosphere where love, you may fall in love, but boy, it's kind of guarded some places under communism. He has since written a book. He says working on a movie. He is a great guy, but he has gone incognito, folks. I don't know where Jack is. I can't get in touch with him. It's either Vladimir Putin or the KGB may come calling on him. I don't know, but I will find out where Jack is and we'll have him back. Great story he has. It is hard for me to even relate his feelings about converting from communism over to our democracy, our republic here in the United States of America. And if you really want to hear a great story from someone who left communism and became an American, fell in love here, he's got children now, and he is scared to death about what is going on in this country right now, okay? He really fears because he said, hey, you're going the wrong way here in America. You better get a grip on things. So thank you, Ellie, for letting me explain that to everybody. Maybe I can find him and we'll have him back one day, but I'm sorry. Yeah.
And if you're interested, I put the link. I think this is the story that you had with him, Pete. I put the link in the chat here with Rockdale, Newton Citizen, I think is here. But either way, it tells his story a little bit more too, if you're interested on reading up about him a bit more.
They can go to my website too.
Right.
Stories in there, veteransarticle.com. It is a great story.
Pete,
I like the guy.
Pete, I see a name on the screen, Brian Doyle. Could that by chance be the old New York Yankee that played second base for them?
That is not, no, but that not related, but they're similar names.
Okay.
Yeah, I had a Penn State course tonight, so fortunately I could not get online right away, so I was a little late.
Well, thanks for joining us anyway, Brian. Appreciate it.
Hey, Pete.
Yes, sir.
I'll track down Chelsea, Jack's daughter.
Jack's daughter? Okay.
In Texas. I have her phone number. And
I'm concerned about him. I really am.
Yeah, I am too, because I tried to call him after he didn't show up and I couldn't get to him too. Yeah. So I'll call Chelsea tomorrow and see if I can find out what's going on with him, and I'll let you know.
Okay. And some of the things that he experienced, understanding that he was a KGB agent, but when he came over here, some of the things that he experienced and went through, it's amusing. It's funny. How do you get a job in America if you're a Russian spy? You go get a library card. And with a library card, you can get a driver's license. Okay. Then you can get a job. You can go
He's
to
a bicycle guy too, remember?
Yeah, you go to school and get a college degree here in America. It's what he did, and he was a Soviet spy. Be sure to check out your neighbors real close, people. All right. Gee, any more questions out there? It's been a good roundhouse discussion tonight. I thank everybody for joining us. I think we've enjoyed this tonight. It's been kind of fun. Hey, Steve, thanks for filling in. Thanks for filling in for a Soviet spy tonight.
I was glad to do it, and you know, I missed that course on spying. So, but I've enjoyed this, and so I don't know how long you guys are on, but I'm gonna have to beg off here pretty soon. So
okay, I understand. You got your grandbaby sitting tonight, I believe.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I do admire that hairline of yours too.
I know we usually like to have a word, a little story from Connor, from one of the veterans that he has interviewed recently. And I see his hand up right now. Connor, would you tell us maybe one of the stories from a veteran that you've interviewed recently?
Yes. His name is Jack Gutzman, Gutman, Jack Gutzman. He was a Navy corpsman in World War II, both the Europe and the Pacific theater. And his first combat mission was the Normandy invasion on D-Day, and he experienced some traumatic stuff from there. But in Okinawa, he remembers seeing a kamikaze plane pilot commits suicide and then hits the Mexico and kills the captain, kills 80 men on that ship.
Wow.
And then he sees General Buckner, who was the commanding general of the 10th Army, being killed by the Japanese. And that was a pretty sad event. But I have his book in my room in the house. If you would like to get his book, he's a good storyteller. He would always tell you at 96 now. He has a very good memory, and he's good at telling jokes for sure.
Well, that'd be great. Connor, I know you've heard about the USS Missouri, right? See you, Steve. Thanks for coming tonight, Steve.
Enjoyed it.
Okay. Connor, you know about the USS Missouri, right?
Oh, yes. That was the ship that ended the war, actually.
Yes, okay. The Japanese surrendered on the USS Missouri. You can still see that ship and visit that ship. But if you look at one of the guardrails, the guardrail is still bent, where a Japanese suicide kamikaze hit that ship. It didn't receive more damage because the bomb didn't explode. But the crew on the USS Missouri gave what was left of that Japanese pilot a military funeral. And that was highly unusual, but it happened aboard the USS Missouri.
And Pete, I got some interesting veterans I've interviewed over the months. If you would like to interview one of my veterans, I'll be glad to do so. I'll ask one of the veterans and he'll probably do an interview with you.
Okay, thank you. Well, there's my name right there. You just add @gmail.com and you can get in touch with me, Connor.
Yep. The highest ranking veteran I interviewed is a retired full-bird colonel. He lives in California, who's a good friend of mine. And he's written a book about his experiences as a P-51 Mustang pilot.
Oh,
and
wow.
then he later became test pilot in Korea, and he was a wing commander, served with his son in Vietnam as a F-105 fighter pilot.
Oh, that's great. Outstanding stories.
Connor, was he in the 8th Air Force perchance?
Yes, he was.
Uh,
He was in the same group that my great-grandfather was.
Hey, I'd like to invite you to the Georgia chapter of the 8th Air Force, which meets PDK Airport at 57th Wing.
Where do you live, Connor?
Lafayette, Louisiana.
Oh, a little bit too far away.
Yep. Long drive, Connor, long drive. Okay.
I see Greg's hand is raised here.
I just had a question for Connor. Was this guy a full bird colonel during the war, or did he attain that rank later on? I'm sort of curious as to, of the World War II veterans who are alive today, what would be the highest ranking person? I seriously doubt there are any generals left. I could imagine there might be some colonels. If you do the math, that's 76 years. So if you're 105 minus 76, you could easily, maybe if everything went well, you could be sort of a colonel in your late 20s. I'm just curious, was this guy a full-bird colonel? And maybe as part of your project, you could sort of try to get a ballpark figure on what's the highest ranking current living World War II veteran.
He was a 22-year-old major in World War II.
Okay, that's
with Chuck Yeager, yeah. The 357th Fighter Group.
Holy cow, okay.
And he and Chuck Yeager became close friends until Chuck Yeager passed away. So he's an interesting fella and lives in California, who's a close friend of mine. And he eventually became test pilot, like I said, and he became full-bird colonel in Vietnam. So interesting guy, and he's almost 100, believe it or not. He's 99 now. He'll be 100. The interesting part, my birthday's the 12th. His birthday is the 13th. So we're one day away.
Okay.
He's a little older than you, though, right? He's not just one day older than you, right? Is that right? Is that the way it works?
Oh, he's well older than me. I'm only 16. He's 99.
Okay.
Well, it's like I say, these guys they're expiring at an accelerated rate, and God bless them. They're all going to be gone pretty soon. And like I say, with them goes the last story. It goes, the truth goes, and after that, it's going to be all revised history. And I'm worried about how things are going to change in the future, because you know how they like to rewrite history. And I'm a history buff. I was a history major, but well.
Pete, I will echo what you said right there by giving our listeners and viewers tonight a little preview of a program that we'll be emailing you all about tomorrow, which is the VBC Veterans History Project. We are launching an oral history initiative, very similar to what we're doing here, so that veterans can record their stories and so that they're saved and so that this living history isn't forgotten. And so what I'll do is I'll put the link to that webpage on our website in the chat. And if you are a veteran or your family member is a veteran and you know that they've maybe told their story to you before, but don't have a record of it anywhere, we would love to have them on and record their story on Zoom just like this, so that, these stories live on. And so, yeah, once again, I will put that link in the chat, but just to put it out there, because it is important that we hear these veteran stories before it's too late.
That's great. I've got an email here I need to respond to, but thank you so much for that, Ellie, because there are different outlets that veterans can go to and get recorded for the National Archives and other places, but a lot of them have not done it yet. And we need these stories out there so that kids in the future, they can go there and learn the truth instead of these revised history books. So thank you for doing that. Who came up with the idea? You?
No, it was a team effort, I would say.
Okay, all right.
A team effort.
Well, I'm going to let you take the credit.
Oh, I will do that.
Okay. Anybody have any more questions? Anything else to say? Been a good roundhouse discussion. Maybe we need to do that one night, Ellie.
Yes, it has been. I know we usually, when we had our Wednesday morning programs, we would have a little bit more of a roundtable discussion. Yeah, it would be nice to have a roundtable these days. We'll put that on the docket.
Okay, very good. Julia, good to see you again. Rick, I see you down there. Thanks for joining us, guys. It's been a good show, and I'm sorry that my spy ended up missing, but maybe we can get him on when I find him, if he's still alive. Being the KGB, you never know. But it's been great. Thanks, everybody, for joining us.